Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 80 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening. Everyone glanced in her father's direction. Most everyone. Several of the honor guard kept their eyes fixed stoically on their captives. The young Morton who had come earlier shook his head. "I don't know, my lord. The High Enchanter barricaded himself inside, with his acolytes, shortly after." He shot a surreptitious glance to Janir. "You went to investigate." The Lord Argotolum frowned. "Is the temple secured?" The Morton stopped. "Yes, my lord. Prince Lucan leads the warriors well, and the beasts have been turned back. It seems they cannot endure a carcatan." For creatures like the Morsanes that relied so heavily on hearing, a carcatan's shriek alone was torture. Janir's human ears couldn't stand it more than a few moments. A warm, stinging sensation rolled over Janir's skin. It was like being touched with invisible embers. Something hot fanned over the back of her neck and slid down her back. Drusilla flinched. Cerilius's brow furrowed. Carlyle shifted and Velasquez inhaled sharply. Even Gwenna grimaced. Something that could affect Argotolums as well as enchanters, elves, and clairvoyants couldn't be magical. It had to be something much, much worse. "Lead the way." The Lord Argotolum snapped to the messenger. "Bring them," he added, gesturing to Janir and her companions. "Lord Caerson cannot move," Luana protested. "Then find a way to move him, she-elf," came the callous reply. Armandius's bleeding had slowed, if not entirely stopped. His eyes remained open and his breathing was steady. Yet he didn't lift his head or give any indication he had the strength to speak, let alone walk. "He needs rest. If you could just let us—" "Bring him." There would be no arguing. Grimacing, Seavan and Velasquez each slung one of Armandius's arms around their shoulders and hefted him upright. The High Lord hung complacent between them as the two elves shuffled after the Lord Argotolum's marching figure. The Argotolum Mortons and Mortanas closed around them. Janir gripped Carlyle's hand, glad he didn't consider himself too manly for it. Luana trailed behind, calmly eyeing their Argotolum guards. She made Janir think of a white lioness, graceful, beautiful, but with a certain deadliness lying just beneath the surface. From the way they watched her, the Argotolums agreed. The Lord Argotolum shouted back once to move faster. At the command, the Mortons closed in from behind, herding their captives on. Janir swallowed and gripped Carlyle's hand just a little tighter. She prayed her father would still honor their agreement. That he hadn't let Armandius die gave her hope. Though, from the way her foster father sagged between the two elves, Armandius might give up the ghost yet. The hot prickling feeling on the back of Janir's neck grew worse as they continued down the hallways. Janir glanced to Carlyle. His face pinched. He felt it too. "They're in there, my lord," the young messenger said. "That will do," the Lord Argotolum clipped. "Wait here." The Argotolums obeyed, several staying behind to guard the prisoners, as their lord marched to the front of a large door studded with tiger's eye. The Lord Argotolum tested the doors. They were locked. "Get them open," was all he said. Within seconds, 4 muscled Mortons were assaulting the door with their boots and shoulders. It was solid and sturdy, but it could only hold up for so long. The door crashed to the ground, and Janir's mouth dropped. Janir gaped, staring at the high-domed ceiling flecked with crystals. The small stones differed in shade, but all were some varying hue of orange. Their colors, coupled with the flaring lamps and the moonbeams shining down from the circular skylight directly overhead, made the room seem as though its walls were coated in a layer of flames. Carlisle fidgeted at her side. In the center, directly below the skylight, there appeared to be a stone pool of some sort, but it was filled with a swirling liquid Janir had never seen before. The substance was bone white mixed with ink black. The two colors swirled and gyrated, each starkly separate from the other. One of the young priests, who had been with Jorman Nufar, stood before the pool surrounded by kneeling acolytes. As the door crashed down, he threw something silver into the pool with the haste of the hunted. He whirled around, trembling to face the door. "Pardon me for interrupting whatever this is." The Lord Argatalam said it in a way that said he was not sorry at all. "But I believe you should be resealing the crypts, not moaning prayers to idols." The young priest bristled and opened his mouth, but he never got to speak. A deep rumbling stirred from the bowels of the earth. The pool began to swirl, the two colors remaining separate and yet mingling together at the same time. Janir didn't have time to wonder what was happening. A whirlpool formed in the liquid, and a sharp wind began to whoosh and swirl around it in a tornado. The ground shook. Everything spiraled into chaos. The wind circling the pool strengthened to rival the most vicious gale. People shouted, but Janir couldn't make out their words. The air clawed at her eyes, making the world around her blur. Everything stopped. The wind hushed and stilled, and the pool stopped whirling. Then everything changed, once again for the worse. The lamps winked out. "What is happening?" the Lord Argatalam demanded as the ceiling began to glow. The young priest sank to his knees before the pool, not answering. "The beasts are turned back, and I swear, priest, if you do not—" A loud crack drowned out the rest of the Lord Argatalam's threat. The black and white swirls in the pool mingled together, turning an ashen gray. Then a new color blossomed from the center. Orange, the reddish color of fire, slowly claimed the pool. "We should get out of here," Seovan murmured. Janir couldn't deny the sense in his words, but nor could she deny a strange fascination for the swirling colors. What was happening? The Lord Argatalam must have reached the same conclusion as Seovan. "Everyone, fall back," he ordered. "Carcotton at the ready." "Weapons will be of no use, Lord Argatalam." The young priest smiled grimly, standing beside the pool. The Lord Argatalam uttered a curse and drew his own carcotton in spite of his injuries. His Argatalam warriors formed a gauntlet around him. Seovan tugged Janir and Carlisle back, but it was already too late. Something began to emerge from the pool. At first, Janir thought it an orb, but she realized with a sick fascination that it was a head. Next followed a neck, a bare chest and arms, and a naked body. The creature was male, and formed as a human, but there was nothing mortal or earthly about him. His skin was the same color as the amber stones above them. It had a certain metallic quality, with glowing yellow veins tracing patterns beneath his skin. Long, matted cords like copper hung from his head and fell below his shoulders. Unnaturally massive muscles seemed about ready to burst from beneath his skin as he continued to rise, lifted upwards by the substance in the glowing pool. Janir's heart pounded and she moved closer to Seovan. She reached out and clutched Carlisle, who gaped in horror as Seovan tried to shield them both. She wanted to run, but doubted it would do any good. And even though he had suggested that they flee, Seovan didn't look about to run either. The creature's head was bowed. Corded hair fell about his face. Then his eyes opened and Janir had to catch her breath. His irises were the color of onyx, as black as ink, while his pupils were the same color as his skin. The creature opened his mouth, revealing rows of savagely pointed teeth. His voice was a growl, carrying the power of thunder. "Who summoned me?" The words were not shouted, nor were they loud, yet they penetrated every layer of Janir's existence. She was sure they would have heard the demon's voice from 1,000 miles away. The creature swung his gaze in a full circle about the room. In one massive hand, the creature held the chalice. The metal lid was gone, and it shone with the finish of newly polished metal. Janir's father made a frustrated noise. A moment later, it was a growl of irritation as the monster crushed the chalice with one hand and tossed it into the pool at his feet. "Essence of war," the young priest called, bowing in supplication. "I did." Essence of war? Malvern? It was outlandish and unthinkable, and yet, how could Janir doubt it? Malvern's otherworldly gaze settled upon the priest. "You..." "Yes." "What madness is this?" The Lord Argatalam sounded like a rabid animal. "You will pay dearly for this." Both priest and monster ignored him. "Kill the Argatalams," the priest whispered, meeting Malvern's gaze with surprising steel. "Save my brothers and sisters in the temple. They will be murdered or enslaved otherwise." The essence cocked his head to one side, glancing at the invulnerables. "You agree to the price?" "I agree," the young priest replied, gulping. "I give my life freely." "Very well." Malvern stepped down from the dais and past the kneeling young man. The Lord Argatalam glowered toward the priest. Drusilla said something to her lord, and he offered a terse response. The Argatalams drew their carcatan, not needing a command. They formed a tight wall, but what did they expect to achieve? They were mortals, against a semi-divine creature. It was hopeless. Seovan folded Janir tighter to him, and she was aware of Cerilius standing close with Canicade. All were ready to die for her, and that frightened her more than the monster. Malvern stopped, perusing the Argatalams before him. No one moved. No one spoke. Who knew if attempting to flee might bring the demon after you? When his eyes reached Janir, they settled. "You..." Seovan pulled Janir back. "You are beautiful," Malvern intoned, moving toward her like a moth to a flame. "So much blood, all spilt by your hand." "You will not touch her," Seovan cried. In a flash, Malvern ripped Janir from Seovan's embrace, flinging the elf across the room like a toy. "Seovan!" Janir cried, hearing him land with a hard thud against the wall. Cerilius stabbed his carcatan into the monster's arm and quickly joined Seovan against the wall. The carcatan did not even leave a mark on the creature's bronze hide. Malvern honed in on Janir. "All those tens of thousands," the essence murmured, catching her by her throat. His single hand encircled her neck like a vice, keeping her more securely than the strongest chains on earth. "Entire armies." Janir struggled, but it was like a mouse trying to free itself from a viper. "Such beauty," Malvern purred. An arrow stabbed into the creature's neck. Malvern's lip curled in annoyance, and he ripped it out. There wasn't even blood on it as he snapped the arrow with one hand. Janir twisted to glimpse Drusilla, standing dumbfounded with a bow. Even the Lord Argatalam's impassive facade wavered in the face of this monster. Malvern raised his opposite hand to lay it over her head. She writhed, fighting to free herself, but it did no good. Janir cried out in frustration, clawing at the fiend's hand, yet he did not even seem to notice. Someone shouted and several people clamored, but they sounded far away, distant and distorted. Someone yelled. There was a clattering, scraping sound, and the patter of racing footsteps. Just as Malvern's hand was about to touch her, there was a grunt and a sharp heave. The essence paused, shock, then fury twisting his features. His ethereal eyes glanced down to his bare torso. Janir blinked in surprise, as the sliver of a sword protruded out the demon's chest. Enraged, Malvern threw her down. Janir hit the ground with a force that threatened to break bones. Her relief was short-lived when she glanced up to the monster turning on Carlisle. "You dare attack me," Malvern bellowed, towering above the enchanter. Carlisle backed away, nervously glancing around. "Oh, Fumets, it worked." The sword was still through Malvern's body, piercing him like a spear, and yet there wasn't even blood. The Lord Argatalim gave a nod, and 3 more Tauns charged Malvern at once. Cerilius tried to grab Janir while Canicade and 2 others attacked Malvern. They struck him with their Carcatan with the fury of madmen, jabbing without reservations. Their Carcatan didn't react, and Malvern didn't even flinch. The fiend seized one by the neck, crushing his skull open on the floor. Canicade attacked, but the creature struck, sending him reeling to the wall. Janir was certain he would have been cracked open had he not knocked into the priest. Malvern seized the other Morton and jabbed him against Cerilius's Carcatan. A shriek sounded, and the man fell to the ground, dead. Cerilius withdrew, glancing between the Lord Argatalim and Janir. They couldn't fight the thing. They couldn't even hurt him. No one could. Carlisle's sword had run him through, but it only seemed to irritate him. Malvern returned his attentions to Carlisle. The Argatalims hanging back, wary of attacking again. The enchanter could have run, but he wasn't going to abandon Janir any more than she was going to abandon him. Janir clambered to her feet. She could see her father, Seovan, and even Velasquez motioning for her to get away, but she wasn't about to leave Carlisle. Malvern loomed above Carlisle, bitter fury brimming in his voice. "I try to help you, and you attack me." "He's not one of my order," shouted the young priest, the one who had summoned Malvern. The monster ignored him. Carlisle kept backing up. What else could he do in the face of a demon? I didn't summon you," Carlisle stammered. Janir's heart twisted. Carlisle had only been trying to help her. She glanced around, trying to think of what to do. Carlisle retreated, falling back to the pool because there was nowhere else to go. Several voices shouted her name, and Cerilius tried to grab her, but she was already running. Janir didn't know what else to do. She ripped the sword out of Malvern's back. In an instant, the essence swung around. He shot a hand for her, but before he could catch her, Janir heaved the sword and cut a deep gash across his face. His roar of outrage shook the dome's ceiling and made the floor quake. Janir's ears popped and the vibrations shuddered through her bones. Wincing, she stabbed him again, this time in the chest, and shoved as hard as she could. Whether it was the pain affecting him, the surprise, or lost balance, Malvern stumbled. One foot splashed in the pool, and the liquid began to swirl once more. Within heartbeats, the raging wind had returned. "No!" screamed the young priest. "No, you can't!" A Carcatan's shriek cut him off. Canicade slammed the priest to the ground, black staining his white robes. Malvern screeched and cursed, spewing words in a forgotten language. His foot sank no matter how hard he fought, drawing him back to wherever he had come from. Janir tore the sword out. Finally, Malvern's blood spilled forth, turning the pool back to its orange glow. The essence bellowed. Janir scrambled as the hurricane-force winds sent the room into a blustery whirl. Carlisle was beside her, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. As they spun around, Malvern's massive hand swung, catching her wrist.
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.